morning, everybody. My name is Ranger Stephanie, and on behalf of the South Carolina State Parks Service, I want to welcome you to Rose Hill Plantation State Historic Site. We're one of the 47 state parks in South Carolina, and we are located in Union, South Carolina. Today with me is the park manager, Ranger Nate, who is filming.
Hey everybody, I'll be facilitating, so if you have questions, you can send them my way and I'll throw them to Stephanie.
And I am Ranger Stephanie, as I said before, and I'm the park interpreter. And today we're going to talk a little about Rose Hill Plantation's kitchen house, which we have right next to me over here. Before we get started going in there, I want to talk to you a little about what's going on in the Park Service. All 47 state parks are currently closed due to COVID-19, and they are closed as of now until May 1st. And we are still here. The rangers are still on the parks, even though we are closed. Currently, park rangers, we are doing a lot of things on the park. We're staying busy. We're working on maintenance projects. We're doing programming. We're doing things like this virtual program right now. There's still a lot of stuff we're doing so that when we do reopen the parks, they're going to be really nice, kind of almost shiny, and lots of new things, hopefully for visitors like you to come and see. So we're going to wait a few minutes before we do head in case we have anybody else joining us on Facebook Live. You will notice behind me here we do have one of our main features on the park, the Big House, the mansion of William Henry Gist. This plantation, Rose Hill, was an active plantation through much of the 1800s, and the Big House here was where William Henry Gist and his family lived. So Rose Hill belonged to William Henry Gist, who was a governor of South Carolina. He was governor just before the Civil War and has the nickname of the Secession Governor. Along with William Henry Gist and his family, Rose Hill was home to up to 178 enslaved individuals at one time. This did vary at different times, but up to 178 people were forced to live and work at Rose Hill and make the plantation very profitable for the Gist family. After emancipation, after the Civil War, many of these enslaved people who are now freed men and women left the area, but some did choose to stay, and some of them stayed at Rose Hill and became tenant farmers and sharecroppers and continued to farm the land. This was an active plantation in the Gist family hands from as early as 1811 all the way through the late 1930s. And if we look around here, all that you're going to be seeing here is area that used to be fields of cotton and corn, open space, and there were workshops to make this plantation active and self-sufficient. You're not seeing any of this now. The park is now surrounded by a national forest, Sumter National Forest, but this would have been a very open space back in the 1800s and all the way till the late 1930s. This was about a 2,000-acre cotton and corn plantation back through from as early as 1811 all the way through the late 1930s. Now, before we head into the kitchen, do we have any questions at all? So we are going to head over here, and you may notice the kitchen house here is a separate building. There would have been a lot of different separate buildings in the plantation, on the plantation in the 1800s. The kitchen would be kind of like the bridge between the fields and the Big House. It would have been an active area, lots of bustling noise, a lot of people coming and going, not like it is now, where you only have myself and Ranger Nate here, and many, many songbirds, but there would have been a lot of people coming and going. So let's head in here, right into the kitchen. And I'm going to reintroduce myself for anybody who is just coming on. My name is Ranger Stephanie. I'm the park interpreter at Rose Hill Plantation State Historic Site. And we are currently in the historic kitchen house at Rose Hill Plantation, right located in Union, South Carolina. Now, we're going to talk a little about the kitchen and how it used to be used in the 1800s a little. And this is kind of, I think, relevant to some people today because a lot of people, including myself, are seeing their kitchen far more than normal. With COVID-19 and social distancing and self-isolation, I think a lot of people are using their kitchens many more times than they normally do. So this is the kitchen of the 19th century plantation of Rose Hill. It may look a little different than your kitchen though nowadays that you're cooking in so often. We have a lot of different tools, gadgets. We have a huge fireplace over here, which would be an oven, a stove, and the microwave of this kitchen. And the kitchen would be cooked in by enslaved individuals. We know based on the 1860 census that the head cook for Rose Hill was a 25-year-old enslaved woman. And we happen to have the census right here. And I'm going to pick it up. We're going to zoom in so you can see it a little. Here is the cook. She's listed as 25, female, and she has an M over here, and it says cook. The census, if you notice, has no names on it. Of 178 people enslaved by William Henry Gist in 1860, not one person is listed with a name. All they're listed with is an age, a gender, and a color. While many individuals on the census have B listed under color, meaning black, the young cook has an M listed next to her name. That M stands for the derogatory term mulatto, meaning mixed race. When we see an M on the census for enslaved individuals, it generally means that that person's father or grandfather was a white man and their mother was black. And they were born and were considered mixed race. The cook, though we don't know her name, we do see some information about her. Right underneath her on the census, there is a boy, a 6-year-old son, 6, male, and he's listed with an M. We believe this boy is the young cook's son, and he also is listed as mulatto, mixed race, meaning that his father and or grandfather was likely a white man as well. I'm going to put the census right over here. So we don't know about the cook, her name-wise, but we do know that she was listed as a cook on the census. So she would have been the one in here making all the food for the white Gist family in the big house. She would have been working with this huge fireplace, her oven, stove, microwave, if you will. And there would have been a fire going in here, but not one big fire. There likely would have been lots of little small different fires. You might have had some coals burning over here that cornbread could be cooked in. You would have a little big fire over here for stew going and different little fires of different heats and intensities. She would have used this crane over here to kind of bring things over so that they could be heated at different levels. And she probably would have used these different tools to help her maintain the fire. Over here, pick this up. We have a poker for the logs in the fire that she could have used to bring a log forward, back, make sure it moves so that you create more heat or reduce heat. A shovel over here so that she could shovel away ash as needed or different things. And this is a very important tool here. You may notice we're using all cast iron right here. That's what this cook would have used when she was making all the food. Cast iron can get very hot. She would have probably had some cloth to pick up the different hot pans and pots, but this would have also been very useful. You do this, pick it up. You could pick up a hot bowl or pot of stew, bring it over, season it, do what she needed to do, and then bring it back. This grabber, I'm not sure the exact precise name, would have been very useful for that. So I'm going to put this back, and we're going to talk a little more about some of the things in here, particularly about some of the things on the table. Before we do we have any questions that have come up or anything like that? Okay, no problem. So we're going to keep going. You may notice some interesting tools on the table here or there, things that you may be familiar with, and some of them you may not be familiar with. Over here, we have a sausage maker. So you have some ground meat that you put right in here, and you could push it down, and on the end would generally be pig intestines, potentially intestines of other animals, and you'd grind that meat in, tie it up, and you'd get some sausages that hopefully look a little better than these. We're gonna head right here and take a look at a very old meat grinder. So put some meat in, and it can be ground up, and that ground meat could be used to cook in a lot of different things. You may have seen this before, mortar and pestle. This could be used to grind up spices, herbs, to be used to cook with, but also could be used to make medication. Grind up certain things that could be used as a salve to help ease burns, cuts, scrapes, and help people heal when they were sick or injured. You probably know, but it's an old, different looking kind of kettle. Could boil some water, make some hot tea with the water, coffee, never know. And this is pretty interesting. This is an example of a gourd bowl or spoon. A gourd is squash. Squash and rice were brought over from Africa when enslaved individuals were forced, they were kidnapped and brought to the United States to be enslaved. And with them, they brought the seeds for squash and rice. Now, squash, after it's hollowed out and dried out, can make these kind of gourd bowls and spoons. Could be very useful to cook with and as utensils. You could use this to kind of scoop in and get water or whatever you needed. So it'd be something that would be seen in plantation kitchens and likely in the cabins of enslaved individuals, because they would be making their own food in their own cabins. The 25-year-old cook that I talked about before, she'd be making all the food for the Gist family in here, but she would not be making the food for the enslaved individuals, the up to 178 people forced to live in labor here. Those individuals, they'd be cooking their own food. And as far as food went, we don't know exactly what they would have eaten. Unfortunately, we have no plantation journal from William Henry Gist, so we don't know exactly what the diet of the enslaved individuals here would have consisted of. But we do know this was a corn plantation. So cornmeal was likely an allotment, a portion of food given to enslaved individuals, and based on a few tenant farmer contracts, this is post-slavery, but we believe that it may have been each individual was given a peck of corn, and a peck of corn or cornmeal is 2 gallons. 1 peck equals 2 gallons. Now, this little bucket here is a gallon. So think about cornmeal. This would have filled this up and this up. And that would be the allotment, what they were given for a week of cornmeal. Cornmeal to make different kinds of food, pancakes, just kind of bread stuff. And then along with the cornmeal, they may have been given a few pounds of pork. Pigs were very common in this area in the upstate of South Carolina, and we know William Henry Gist had a lot of pigs on the plantation. So along with cornmeal, bacon or pork would have been given to the enslaved individuals, we believe is definitely a possibility. As far as other food, that's all we know. They may have been only given that per week, per individual. Now it is possible that the enslaved individuals were given permission to farm their own little gardens in front of slave cabins. And maybe after a very long day toiling, working in the fields, from sunup to sundown potentially, some enslaved individuals may have been given permission to go to the river to fish, go out hunting, And anything they caught could have been used to supplement, give extra meat on their table. But we don't know if that was allowed at Rose Hill. It's just a possibility. So I'm going to talk about a few other things in here that you may have noticed. And I want to talk about this little interesting thing right here. This here is a butter churner. So this was a big plantation, like a farm almost, except bigger. There would have been lots of cows, goats, chickens, pigs here. And from the milk the cows gave, the milk would go in here, and then generally an enslaved child would spend hours at a time moving the stick up and down to churn the milk. That milk would then eventually churn into butter. And butter, they'd want a lot of butter on a plantation this size. Rose Hill was about a 2,000-acre cotton and corn plantation. And the Gist family would have wanted butter on their table, and they would have wanted butter used to cook their meals. So there was probably a lot of butter churned in this kitchen. So before I head and talk a little about the other things, do we have any questions that have popped up? Okay, we got no questions, so I'm going to talk a little about what we have right over here. This is our washing machine, and this bucket here would have been filled with water, and this washboard, the clothing, would have been run over this with some soap, and the clothes would have been washed in here. Now this is where the clothes for the Gist family would have been washed. Enslaved individuals would have been washing them. After the clothes were sufficiently washed, they'd likely be put on a clothesline, hanging out in the yard to dry, and then the clothes would need to be ironed so they look nice and straight. So we have our ironing board here, and we have our iron. Now if you look closely here, you may notice there's no knobs on this iron. It's not like a modern iron. This is just iron. It would be put in the fire to heat up, and then some cloth likely would have been used to grab it so whoever was holding it, their hands would not burn. And then they would iron on this ironing board the clothing. But because there's no temperature gauge on this, whoever was ironing would have to be very careful, because if the iron got too hot, there would be iron-shaped burns right in that clothing. And if the iron was too cold, it wouldn't get the wrinkles out of the clothing. So once the iron got a little too cold, they'd have to switch out. But whoever was ironing clothes would have to be careful and kind of gauge how good they were doing it, because they did not want to burn the clothes. And all these things would have been done by enslaved individuals. As far as the washing, it was probably not done in this kitchen itself, but behind the kitchen, where oftentimes there was a yard. This is where there was a lot of activity. There would be clothing being washed, people running around, there would be candle making, butchering, just lots of things going on. And I mentioned candle making, and let me grab this here. We have a candle making mold to make taper candles. The wick would go in here, be threaded through here, and then the wax would go in. Now it's possible that they could have used beeswax to make the candles, and that would have been some decent smelling candles, some good smelling candles. But oftentimes, back in the 1800s, when this plantation was pretty active, beeswax wasn't used. It was oftentimes animal fat, tallow, that would burn very nicely, but when it burned, it wouldn't be the best smell in the world. But they weren't looking for necessarily nice smelling candles. They were looking for candles to give them light, because no electricity here at Rose Hill until the Park Service took over in 1960. So the Gist family and the enslaved individuals who were forced to live here, and later the tenant farmers, they would all be using candles for light when it got dark out. So we'll talk a little more about some of the stuff in here. You may see we have some meat hanging from here. There would have been likely, along with the kitchen house, other little buildings kind of related to the kitchen house nearby. A smokehouse may have been nearby where they would smoke meat. Smoking meat was very important because there was no refrigeration, no refrigerators really, back in the 1800s when this was an active plantation. But they would want to preserve, keep that meat so it could last a while. So meat would be smoked. The smoking, and sometimes they salted it, the smoking process would make it so that right over the base of the meat, the skin on top would form like a seal, almost like plastic, and that little seal would keep bacteria out. It's kind of like if you ever had jerky, that's kind of what it's like. It keeps the bacteria out, that little seal. It's kind of tough meat, but bacteria doesn't get in it and that meat lasts for a long time. So there'd be a smokehouse. There might have been a cold storage for storing canned goods. They would probably take some fruits, even vegetables, pickle them, and press them and can them so they last way into the winter, and they have them for a long time. And we do have one thing that I want to point out over here. You may recognize this. If you've ever seen Frozen, you probably know what this is. This is an ice grabber. We don't know for sure, but it's very possible the Gist family had an ice house. They would have purchased ice, big blocks of ice, during, say, February, March, then bring those blocks of ice here and put them in the ice house. They'd cover that ice with straw and or sawdust, things to pack it tight so the ice stays really well insulated. And that ice would stay there, slowly melting, but very slowly, and it would last hopefully through summer all the way into fall. That ice could be used to keep things cool, like milk, eggs, all different things they wanted to keep cool so it didn't go bad. Remember, without electricity, there was no refrigeration. So that ice house could help keep things really cool like we have nowadays. It could even help make ice cream on really cold, hot summer days. So I'm going to put this back up here. And we are going to head into the mansion next. Before we do we have anybody who has any questions? Okay, that's fine. Let me grab my hat here. And we are going to head right out over here. We hear lots of songbirds out here. We can't wait for visitors to come back, but it is important that everybody does keep self-quarantine, isolated. Right now, we're keeping the parks up and going pretty well so that everything is nice and neat when everybody does get to come back to the parks. And we're heading over here to the side door. We don't normally go through the side door of the mansion. This door may have been used by enslaved individuals to bring food into the mansion. We know based on that 1860 census that I keep talking about that the head cook was 25 years old in 1860. We also know that there were three enslaved teenagers listed as house servants in that census. 2 boys and 1 girl. They were between the ages of 14 and 16. These individuals were probably the ones who would bring the food into the mansion. They also have been the ones to remove dishes, keep the fire going, and keep this house spotless. So let's head into the big house. So this room, we believe, was used as a dining room when the Gist family lived at Rose Hill. And as for who would have dined here, it would have been William Henry Gist, his wife Mary Elizabeth, and in 1860, since I keep referring to that census, there were some of their children here. They had William, who was 18, they had Caroline, who was 16, and David Christopher, who was 14, who may have dined with their parents on a regular night. They also had a son, Richard, who was 21 at the time. He was married to a woman named Lavina. They lived nearby, so Richard and his wife may have come and dined with his parents at times as well. And of course, course, it's always possible guests would have come over and dined with the Gist family. This would have been just where the white Gist family ate. Those 3 enslaved teenagers who were listed as house servants on the census may have stood here in the dining room, though, while the Gist family ate their food. On call, basically, if the Gist family needed anything at any point. So, we are going to give you a special treat. We are going to head upstairs. As we head up, I want you to take a look at the spiral staircase we're going to head up. It's a very pretty staircase and is original. And we're still live, right? Okay. So we're going to head upstairs. You'll notice it does spiral up. So you can head this way. Hopefully you don't get motion sickness. I know some people do during the movement of a camera. And this is kind of like a little ride as you head up the staircase. And we are going to head out onto the balcony. After a meal inside the dining room, the Gist family may have come out here to digest their food and relax. You can kind of look around here, virtually look around, and you'll notice there's some big trees right out front. These are southern magnolia trees. They're about 180 years old. So these would have been here likely when the Gist family owned the plantation, and would have been kind of just over here looking at the front entrance view of the plantation. So we're just going to give you a nice glimpse of this. Hopefully you'll be out here soon so that you can see these beautiful views with us. But in the meantime, we're going to keep giving you some virtual programming so you can virtually enjoy everything the South Carolina State Parks has to offer. We have more programs that are going to come up. I believe our next one is going to be Monday. We do them daily during the weekdays. They seem to be going all at 10 a.m. Some are going to be live, just like this one, and others will be recorded. We do hope you'll join us for all the other programs, and we do hope to get these Facebook programs up on a YouTube channel, the South Carolina State Parks YouTube channel, so that anybody who doesn't have Facebook can see them themselves. So I do hope you enjoyed our little tour of Rose Hill. Rose Hill Plantation State Historic Site. We'll be back on Facebook along with other parks shortly, and we hope you enjoy our programming.